Hello, and welcome to Confessions of a Successful Leader, hosted by me, Andrew Tallents, the self-coaching expert. In each episode of the show, we hear the insightful confessions of a successful leader who wants to inspire others to live their professional and personal dreams. I am always keen to hear your feedback, particularly in relation to the kinds of leaders you would like me to invite onto the show in future. But for now, sit back, relax, and enjoy the rich insights from our special guest. Hello and welcome to another episode of Confessions of a Successful Leader, hosted by me, Andrew Tallents, the self-coaching expert. I'm delighted that Paul Lester has joined me in the studio today. Paul is chairman of both FTSE and PE companies, following a successful CEO career. He's been a member of the UK Government Major Projects Review Group since 2005 and has also served as a non-executive director on the board of a FTSE 100 company. He's a chartered engineer and a fellow of the Institute of Mechanical Engineers. Paul was awarded a CBE in 2007 for his services to engineering. And like me, he has a passionate football supporter. Unfortunately, his team is doing far better than mine at the moment. We'll talk about that later. Paul, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Andrew. Thanks for inviting me.
Good to see you. I'm sure the audience would love to know a bit more about you personally and professionally. So tell us a bit more about yourself and your current focus.
Yeah, as you mentioned, I work for industrial businesses, engineering and construction, with the odd exception, but that's been where I started from and certainly what I do now. I had a career, as you say, building up to CEO. And then I started doing the chairmanships about 12 years ago. So I treated this as a second career. I always think the best job in the world is being a CEO, but this comes a close second. And I think people now in non-executive directorships, which is what it is, have made that much more professional and a proper career over the last 20 years compared with what it used to be. So my main focus, you mentioned it, FTSE 250 company, Essentra, and currently 3 private equity businesses. I think I've done about 12 private equity shares because obviously they turn over as they build them up and sell them, which typically lasts 3, sometimes 4 years. And I'm hoping that that will happen again fairly soon. But the market's not in great shape to be selling businesses or indeed buying them, but I think that will change next year at some point.
Sure. And I did mention obviously about the passion for football. So in terms of when you're not working, I know you work very hard, but what is it you do to switch off and outside of work?
Yeah, I think the two things is I go and watch my team, unfortunately, West Bromwich Albion. So it's a good trek from Poole up there, which gives me a chance to chat to my daughter, Kate, who I go up with, and my son, who lives in Spain, Ian, comes over occasionally. And it's light relief, if you can call watching West Brom light relief. And the other thing I do is I go to the gym a fair amount and I run. Although when you're running, I tend to use that as a thinking time, like a lot of people do. So I wouldn't say that's light relief because you gravitate back to work pretty quickly. But I think it's important to have a little bit of downtime. But much easier when you're a chair as opposed to a CEO. CEO is 24/7.
Yeah, no, I agree. Excellent. And all the audience wants to know a little bit more about, your successful leadership style over the years. But we go on a journey with that, don't we? And sometimes our childhood experiences shape those earlier years of leadership. We don't really know what that is then. It tends to be at an unconscious level. So share with us a bit more about your earlier years, childhood years, and how that shaped that leadership style.
Yeah, it's not something I've given a lot of thought to actually till we had the chat prior to coming on the programme. Not surprisingly, I was born in Birmingham, not far from West Brom. Otherwise, you'd never support them. And it was I grew up in a council house and went to I would say typical Birmingham schools, and I loved my sport. So sport was very important. Playing football for the school and running for the school. And I think ending up as sort of captain of the school team starts to shape your leadership. If I look back, some people today, they say captains of football team aren't so important. I think that's probably true. But in those days, you were the driver. You would be pushing the other players pretty hard, which is what I used to do. And I think then you suddenly realise you do get a reaction. But also, you got to treat the players differently. You'd have certain players that need an arm around them, others need a kick up the backside, which is sort of old-fashioned sort of management style of footballers, which you hear, the Alex Ferguson school of management versus, I would say, the more modern approach that you tend to get now. So, I think that sort of started you thinking about man management, although it was boy management probably at school, but man management, it's pretty similar.
And what were those leadership values that were instilled at a young age that maybe came from your family system or those earlier role models that were around you?
Yeah, no, that's a good question because my parents had gone through World War II successfully, otherwise I wouldn't be here. But that was a pretty traumatic time for them, especially my father was in the 8th Army, which was pretty brutal, going up through Africa and into Italy. And then they had to reinvent themselves after the war because that was their 18 to 23. And then they had to get jobs. They hadn't been qualified. My father went to college or night college, managed to get himself a job, and I could see even as a small child, they worked very hard. So I think the work ethic rubbed off on me and probably my sisters that the way forward is to work hard, and that's what I did. I think. I remember having a bit of a shock at school because I think I was in the second year of my senior school and the headmaster asked to see me in his office, and in those days that meant you're in serious trouble. And he said to me, if you only put the same effort into football and athletics as you could do for your work and homework in particular, you could actually do quite well. So it's a bit of a wake-up call. And my parents absolutely agreed with that because he'd spoken to them before. And I think it was quite a turning point. So I actually started knuckling down to my more academic work. And I think that helped, certainly in terms of getting GCSEs, O-levels and A-levels. That was a big difference because without reasonable qualifications, you're always going to struggle to get on that first run of the ladder, wherever that might be.
And can you remember what your first role models were outside of the family system or outside of education? What were the early memories of that?
I think I wouldn't say they were great role models that I met in the early days, but I remember, in fact, I relayed this story to somebody just recently, a guy called Ralph Robbins, who ended up as CEO of Rolls-Royce and chair. And I'd only just finished I did a student apprenticeship where you spend 6 months at college/university and 6 months actually working on shop floors, drawing offices. I was an engineer, or trained to be an engineer. And I got taken by the commercial director of Doughty, who I worked for, to a meeting in Derby, which was the home of Rolls-Royce. And it must have been probably mid-70s, something like that. Ralph Robbins was actually the commercial director. And basically we were going up for, I'd say, a bollocking because they wanted to reduce the cost of their engine, remembering that Rolls-Royce went bust in 1971, bailed out by the government. So this was the new beginning, and they realised they were far too expensive, competing with Pratt & Whitney and GE from the States. So it was a roll call of everybody in the industry, Doughty, Lucas, BA Systems, you name it. And he basically put forward that we had to reduce our costs, become way more efficient, and they would sell more engines and we would do, obviously, more work. And he did it in a really nice, professional way, but he made all his points. I remember looking at him and thinking, I want to be like that when I grow up, to be a senior manager, because he did it, where he was quite motivating, as well as damning us that, we had to change, make dramatic change. And I got to know him, Ralph, is well retired now. He's a massive Derby supporter. So at one point, when we were in the same league, I used to go up to Derby to watch the games, and he used to come down. And I worked with him on a charity project as well. So I got to know him really well over the years, and related this story to him, not originally, but when I met him, but many years later. And he was an original sort of gentleman of the industry, as well as being a good engineer himself.
So we're getting a really lovely picture of what was shaping you in those earlier leadership roles that you're going into. So there was the hard work ethic coming from the family system. There was that ability to drive through your team captaincy as well, and drive others and get the best out of them. And then you had this role model as well. We said, actually, I can see how I can deal with difficult situations in, a very skilled way. When did you actually get to a stage in your career when some of those things weren't always serving you all the time? Because working hard gets you so far, doesn't it? And we start to learn as we get older, there's smarter ways of doing things.
Yeah, I think you start, my first general manager's job, that's when you start pulling some of these things together. Where you have, I think my first one had about 400 people working for me in a manufacturing plant. And I think then you suddenly realise that your motivation skills are going to be tested pretty thoroughly by a whole range of different people who I'd worked with in the past. And you'd realise also pretty quickly, which most people do, you need a really good team around you, and a balanced team where you have different skill sets which balance each other off. So if you've got somebody who's fantastic at operations but hasn't got a strategic bone in their body, you've got to find, if that's not you, which I think I'm pretty reasonable on the strategy, but also pulling them all in so they buy into the strategy and the vision. And I think that's a big part of it. But that was in the 80s, when I would say management techniques were different. And I'm a big believer that management is a style that you have to look hard at about every 5 years. I think it changes. And certainly if you look at the modern manager now, who has social media and information overload, very different to what was going on in the 80s, 90s, and probably the start of this century, actually. It has changed quite dramatically, and you've got to change with it.
What comes to mind in terms of that sort of 30, 35 years of being general manager into CEO roles, where you had to significantly change your leadership style to go with those changes every 5 years? What comes to mind?
Yeah, I think also the company's got bigger and bigger. So you end up with thousands of employees. I forget what VT was, and it was about 15,000, 20,000 employees. And then you realise that it's no good just getting your small direct team together. You've really got to influence the top 50 to 100 people in the company, because you can't possibly be in touch with everybody. Yeah, you can communicate with them. Today, you might use Twitter or X to communicate more generally, or do notes around or whatever. But you've got to get that top 50 to 100, and it's up to you to decide whether it's 50, 75 or whatever. But they have to believe in where the business is going and the change management that's always going on, so they can then influence and motivate the groups of people that they are responsible for. So it's this stage management all the way through, right down to whoever. If you can get out there as an individual and do town halls around your various divisions, factories, whatever it is, then that adds to it. But you can't rely on that alone. You've got to have people, all those 50 to 100 people, believing in where the business is going. But you have to convince them first. It's no good just having a presentation and say, this is what we're going to do. They have to be part of putting together that strategy and where the business needs to go. And change management now is so important. It always was, but change happens a lot quicker now.
It does. And as you're becoming more mature, we obviously, find different ways of doing things. What was it finding in terms of that stakeholder management that you're talking about? Because obviously there's managing upwards, there's managing downwards, there's managing to the side as well in terms of partner suppliers. What are you having to do differently as a human being in terms of your leadership style?
Yeah, I think you just mentioned manage upwards. I think one of the things you've got to do, certainly as a chair in particular, because that's the pointy bit of the pyramid, and you are probably spending a lot of time with the stakeholders and shareholders, you've got to watch people managing upwards to you. In other words, they're good at managing upwards, but they might not be so good managing downwards. And if you're in a true international business, which certainly I've tended to be in over the years, and still am, particularly with a centre that operates all around the world, you've got all the different cultures. Where in Asia they respect their bosses, and they don't always want to tell them bad things. And then you go to the States, and they're super optimistic. And they're very good at selling the problem and how to solve it and all the rest of it. And sometimes they cover up the cracks that are appearing because they just want to be optimistic. So I think I've given you the sort of two extremes there, and there's plenty in the middle. Around Europe in particular, they're all very different, the French, the Germans. So I think it's very important you understand the culture of the different management teams that you might have in these countries. And indeed, they need to understand our culture as well. So it really is quite difficult what motivates people is very different on an international scale, or how to get the best out of people. So I think you modify that over the years as you get to really understand. And I think that's where getting older and wiser comes in, that you have that experience, which I think is good when you're carrying out these chairman roles.
Absolutely. And what is it about your own personal motivation that keeps you as engaged today as you were all those years ago as a CEO?
Yeah, I think, first of all, I just love what I do. And I think I've been fairly lucky in what I've achieved, particularly as a CEO. I always say to people, you need to work hard, you need to be smart, but you need to have good people wrapped around you. And motivating that team is so important, as we've discussed. But you also need luck, because if you do all those things and have some luck along the way, it could be a competitor falling, badly, screwing things up. It could be an environment in a particular market that's taking off, and you saw that it could take off and you prepare for it, but you've spent some money to do it, and you take off. That becomes the cream on the cake, that your business will do really well. And it's also worth remembering that if you do have some lucky points in time, remember the luck and don't think you're just wonderful and you can do anything in business. I've seen that happen and fail quite badly. So yeah, I think accepting what you've achieved, but also recognizing you can't do it on your own. It's very rare you can do anything on your own in business. So I think that's keep your feet on the ground would be my strong advice.
Yeah. Now, one of the things that we haven't talked about a lot in the past on these particular kinds of shows is, well-being, and it's much more important now in organisations because people are much more aware of their own personal well-being. One of the things that I've come across in the last couple of years is this ability of leaders to be aware of what their negative feelings are and being able to shift away from them to see the gift in the situation or to see the opportunity in the situation as opposed to dwelling in the negativity. I'm happy for you to speak to either your experience with West Bromwich Albion here or your executive career. How did you manage those negative thoughts as they come to you, whether that's doubt, frustration, sometimes impatience? Just talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think, I'd class myself as a reasonably optimistic person. I usually see positives in most things. But obviously you've got to face up to negative situations. And I think that there's a number of things. The business could be performing quite poorly because of a difficult market. I'm just picking lots of things out. Making people redundant is super negative and difficult to do. If anybody tells you making people redundant is just part of the job, it is, but it's really difficult. And I think how you do that and how you look after the people is really important, whether it's a CEO leaving the company or a handful of people, who are at the bottom end of the pyramid. They all need to be treated well or best as possible. I think in business life you do get knocks, there's no question about it. But I think you've got to think through it and how do you come out the other side? It's the old adage that, there's often a silver lining knocking around somewhere, and you can find it. And I think it's important, particularly if you want to get that team motivated back up again, you've got to find the positives and work out what you've learned from the negatives as well. So it's never all bad news. There's always something you can pull out of it, because it's teaching you something each time and teaching your team something each time. So, yeah, it's... but also, if you do have that sort of fall down, either in the profits or whatever, then once you start going up the slope again, if you want to liken it to football, I can remember when West Brom escaped relegation, and my Man United friends had won the Premiership, and I can tell you who was the most excited out of all the fans. Everything's relative. A moderate success, if you're not achieving it on a regular basis, you feel really great about it. If you achieve it all the time, you get complacent. And that's exactly what happens to often businesses and football teams. There's always somebody coming up behind you. I'm going to overtake you.
Yeah, absolutely. Have you sensed, from a chair's perspective and also non-executive in private equity as well, have you sensed that there's more acceptance now for executives to be much more open about their negativity and their mental well-being? Have you sensed that yourself in the last few years?
Yeah, I think, and you'll like this one, Andrew, I do recommend my CEOs all have coaches, mentor stroke coaches, because they need to talk about issues, and it could be personal as well as business, to a third party rather than somebody like me as a chair, because obviously we have good, strong relationships, but it's very business. And yeah, we talk about sport and we were going to have a beer. But if they've got the issues that can happen in business life, social life, family life, then I think it's pretty important they have somebody they can go and talk to. It could be simple as a friend, but I think a professional coach is definitely worth having and spending appropriate time with.
Yeah, super. And you mentioned a little bit of advice before for leaders. What else comes to mind in terms of people that are listening to this show and watching this now, in the sense of they're on a leadership journey, they're maybe 10, 20 years behind us, but they're really aspirant and they are ambitious still. If they can relate to your story today about hardworking background, recognizing they can drive people, but need to watch out sometimes when that's appropriate with larger teams, what advice would you give to them?
I'd be careful what goals you set. A lot of people, I do spend time with the graduates intake in my companies. I love to sit down and spend a couple of hours with them, because the energy is unbelievable and the world's their oyster. And I think it's part of trying to make sure we keep them as well, that they have regular contact with the senior people in the company, because they're the future. And they always ask the question, I can absolutely guarantee somebody will ask the question, how do I become a CEO? And I say, actually, luck plays a big part of it. But actually, what you should be setting your sights on is moving up into the senior team, because there's some super jobs up there. There's only one CEO, but there's quite a few other jobs that you can identify as you build up your career that you can get into. And often those jobs will teach you just as much as being a CEO. And sometimes that gives you the ability to go and start your own company up, go into private equity, work for a corporate. All doors are open. So I said, don't just say, I want to be up the top of that pile, because the chances of getting there are pretty slim. And you might do it, you might not. You'll only get disappointed. So I'd set general direction of goals rather than a specific one. That would be my advice. Otherwise, you'll get very disappointed and frustrated, and you'll set the wrong timescales, because these things come along, and take advantage of them when they do. And often I would always say to somebody, if you're not happy in your job, and I mean, you spend a number of days where you get up in the morning, you think, I'm not really looking forward to work, go and change. You've got to change. You can't carry on doing that job, because if you're happy in your job and you really love it and enjoy it, guess what? You're going to be really good at it and do really well. And it just might not be the right environment for you, the wrong culture in the company or whatever. You need to move.
I heard a great variant of that the other day, which was that Sunday night feeling. When we go to bed on a Sunday night, how are we actually feeling about getting up the next morning in relation to our work?
Yeah, I've been lucky. I've always looked forward to the next day. It is lucky to have that feeling, and unfortunately a lot of people don't. It's like choosing a career, and I don't think parents will do it anymore, but often they say, could you give my son or daughter some advice about the type of job, because we think they should be an accountant or a lawyer. And when you start talking to them, it's the last thing they want to be. And you just ask them what they're good at and what they love. And if they love history or whatever, go and do that, because you're going to do really well at it. And then once you've got, let's say that's a degree or whatever, then you can sit back and decide what you do next. What do you like next? And if you follow that, you'll do really well. But you'll be a happy person, which is more important than doing a job that you're not going to be good at.
I agree. And let's look to the future for you, Paul. So obviously you told us before what it is you're doing now, but what are you going to be in service of for the next 5 years or so, and how can people help and collaborate if that's something they want to do?
Yeah, well, I will be, I would imagine, still doing some work for the private equity companies that I know, and I still get calls to see if I've got availability, so I expect that'll continue. I have invested in a business that we, as a family business, we own 50% of, and that's a local business that I'd like to spend more time with and grow. It's been growing reasonably well, but I think we could do better. So, yeah, and I think I've got a number of things, but I need to be busy, otherwise I'm going to be a pain in the backside to everybody. And I like being busy, and I enjoy what I do. I love doing the work I do and being involved in business, and having a lot of business friends, which I include you in that, Andrew. It's just great spending time with people who've got vision and energy. And I'll still be, unfortunately, going all the way up to West Brom to watch my team, I suspect.
Absolutely. And I didn't share at the start, I'm a Manchester United fan, and we always have these conversations. And I think you are doing better than we are at the moment, so I'm going to give you that one. Well, Paul, I really appreciate you sharing your experiences with the audience today. It's been insightful listening to your earlier background, the earlier career, obviously the learning as well from managing large teams in large businesses as well. So I know many of the leaders out there today would have been inspired by actually what you've said, maybe apply it to their own self-leadership, leaders of others as well. So I just want to say again, a big thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to come on the show today. And thanks very much for being on the show.
I've enjoyed it, Andrew. Thanks for inviting me again.
See you soon. Bye.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of Confessions of a Successful Leader. You can access all previous episodes of the show at confessionsofaSuccessfulLeader.com. If you are interested in finding out more about conscious leadership and self-coaching, just type in Andrew Tallents into LinkedIn or your favorite browser, and you'll find my contact details and all the content that you need. Until next time, don't forget to stay present, curious, and above all, conscious.